Welcome to our present state versus history on speaker. Here we are focused on the current events of our culture through the principles of our history, trying to make sense of the culture and the mindset of today. I am your host, Ray Mayfield. Well, okay, folks, here we are again back on the pod. It is Saturday, the 3rd of February. Man, oh man. Time just keeps slipping into the future, doesn't it? Faster and faster and faster. But we've been dealing with this constitutionality of Congress and affairs of states, dealing with this situation with Governor Abbott in Texas. I don't want to keep beating around on that. I'm just going to touch on a few things that we didn't quite get out in that last podcast dealing with the states. Most of Article 1, Paragraph 10, or Section 10, is dealing with the states and, maintaining unity. I guess I'll just put it like that, in the dealings with what's going on as a union, because we don't want states to be able to just come and go as they please just because somebody gets upset. It's people talk about, Texas will just succeed from the union. Well, it's not that simple. They can't really do that. There's a compact, which is what Abbott's talked about, that the federal government has violated, and which is a mutual agreement between the two. And most of the articles dealing with Article 1 in the states is dealing with that unity of finances and contracts between states and trade and merchandise and all those things. But in Article 1, Section 10, Paragraph 3, it deals with the acts of war, I guess you could say, because basically the state does not have the authority to declare war or enter into a war type arrangement outside of Congress or the federal government. However, it does have the right to protect itself. It says right in the third paragraph of Section 10 of Article 1, it says, without the consent of Congress, no state shall engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger that action must be taken. The consent of Congress, taken before rather, the consent of Congress can be obtained. So the imminent danger goes back to the President of the United States. And I know that there's some, bringing that up. I didn't mention in the deal, there's some, they talk about some of these changes that's been made in the more current history as to war powers and giving the president power to declare these war things and stuff like that. But what we're talking about here is the original intent of our Constitution, and if we were operating within that, okay? And in this aspect here, it's saying that if the state is invaded, they can defend themselves, okay? They have the right to protect themselves. And here again, this goes back to the point that we made during the podcast before with Abbott. He has declared an invasion from his southern border, so therefore that gives him the right, if the federal government was to come in and seize the National Guard, which is what we were talking about before, they would have to admit that the declaration that Abbott has made has been a correct one. And, and another thing that they've been talking about is this supremacy clause. They're talking about who's supreme, the federal government or the states, Well, the reality of it is, according to our Constitution, the people are supreme. The state and the federal, neither one is supreme. The people are. And if the people within the state of Texas are crying out that things need to be done, then that is the supreme order of business, okay? And now we have this move across the country of other states coming alongside Governor Abbott. And so that is a pretty clear declaration of the will of the people. And as I've mentioned a million times on these podcasts, the purpose of all of our elected offices, state, federal, or otherwise, is to perform the will of the people. And if these officers that are elected to these positions do not know what the will of the people is, then their very first order of business is to find out, not to come in and tell me what they're going to go to Washington or Jefferson City or wherever their office is and do for me. I don't know. I don't think I've ever had a politician running for public office come into my place of business during the day trying to get my vote and say, Raymond, what would you like for me to do if I get elected? But they all seem to have a plan to tell me what I need when they get there. See, this is a problem in our country today. We are not a people sending people to do our will anymore. We are people picking the guy with the best plan, and that is absolutely wrong. We need to get back to dealing with these political offices as they were intended to be. And, we're talking about the things of the president. I want to go over briefly. Now, there is no way I'm going to be able to cover all of this stuff in detail, okay? But I just want to point out a very staunch contrast to the way things are being done today versus the way things were intended to be done. Okay? When the forefathers put together the mandates of our Constitution for the duties of our president, I'm going to move on here to Article 2, okay? In Article 2, we find out that one of the most powerful offices in the world happens to be the office of the President of the United States. That's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's put into the order of what it was intended to be, because even though the president has a lot of power there, he's still restricted in what he can do and how he can operate. He's not the, what you want to call, supreme king that sits above everybody. Okay? And you can read through Article 2 in the Constitution and see it's very clear. But there were a few areas here. It's just amazing to me because I never seen these things put together, I guess, in such a contrast, because when you set them down side by side and you write it down on paper and then you're sitting there looking at it, I mean, it just opens up your whole understanding of how far away we've got. But I'm just going to read to you the areas. In the original Constitution, there were 6 areas that the founding fathers said the president should be responsible for. Okay, we're talking about the duties of an office. We're talking about the weight that's on the man who sits behind the desk of what he's supposed to be doing. The founding fathers contemplated the heavy responsibility for the president, but limited him to 6 areas. Here are those 6 areas of presidential responsibility as they apply to our own day. The president is the chief of state over 300 million Americans. He's the commander-in-chief over a military force of 3 million. Now, these numbers came from around 2007, 2009 at the earliest, okay? So they're old. These are old statistics as far as numbers-wise go. But we're talking about over 3 million Americans. We're talking about the chief executive officer over the whole branch of government. We're talking about the chief diplomat in handling all foreign relations. He's supposed to be the chief architect of needed legislation and the conscience of the nation, granting pardons and reprieves when he feels justice requires them. Those are the 6 things. Chief of state, commander-in-chief, chief executive officer of the executive branch, chief diplomat, chief architect of legislation, and the conscience of the nation. 6 things. Now, here are some of the things that Congress has assigned to the president since the founding of this nation. He's responsible for maintaining a full employment of a workforce of the entire nation. The task of ensuring a high level of agricultural prosperity. The task of developing a national housing program. The task of supervising the executive distribution of atomic energy resources. The underwriting of hundreds of billions of dollars in private loans and private insurance programs. Providing various kinds of federal relief for victims of national disasters throughout the country. Administering a national welfare program. Administering a national Medicaid and Medicare program. Administering a national Social Security program. Allocating billions of dollars for education to the young. Settling major labor union management disputes. Administering a network of health agencies. Administering environmental protection of the entire nation. Administering nearly 40% of the nation's land and area resources. Administering supervisory control over the discovery and development of all major energy resources. Regulating all major United States industries such as steel, automobile manufacturing, coal, oil, metal mining, and so forth. Supervising all radio, television, broadcasting in the United States as prescribed to issuing licenses. Monitoring, manufacturing, and distributing of food, drug, and required special permissions of any drug being distributed. Initiating various types of federal programs and regional bases to develop many powers and activities originally reserved to the sovereignty of the states. Now, that ought to just amaze you. Now, Mr. Madison, when he was talking about the things that was going on, should be going on in the federal government and our president, he said, I quote, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and prosperities of the people, and the internal order, improvements, and prosperities of the state." So all of these things that this president is now supposed to be responsible for, and I mean, there's many of them that I've read down through here, it's not that those programs should not exist, but those programs should not exist under the headlines of the federal government. Talking about administering a Social Security program. Well, I get a lot of them mad at me. I get my folks mad at me. You know, I've paid into Social Security my whole life. I ain't seen a dime of it, and I don't think I ever will. By the time I get to where I can draw that Social Security, they're already cutting the benefits. They're adding to the age limits, they just keep pushing it out further and further away. But, since I was 15 years old, I was smart enough to figure out that probably wasn't ever going to happen. I've never got a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow in my life. I don't know about any of the rest of you. But every time I've chased that rainbow to the end, you know what I found where it went in the ground? Nothing. Now, I don't know if any of you ever found a rainbow where it went in the ground, but I have chased them down. And there's places too, time or two, when I lived up in Seattle, Washington, them mountains, them rainbows is all the time. You could chase them down and see where they hit the ground. You know what's there? Whatever's in the ground. Leaves and dirt. Work. Ain't no prosperity there. It's a folklore to get you chasing a carrot. Providing various kinds of federal relief programs for national disasters throughout the country. That's nonsense. Does it mean we don't provide for disasters? No, absolutely not. But if we're a Christian nation, we help our brothers out, right? So we have a state, because if there's a disaster and a natural catastrophe within our country, it's going to be, first of all, in a state, right? Which actually, first of all, it's going to be within a county, or actually maybe we'll bring it back down to a city, huh? Or actually we'll bring it back down to a neighborhood, huh? And it starts out right there. What is it that the founding fathers' basic element was? That any problem that can be solved should be solved at the lowest level possible. So we have a natural disaster that comes through a town. I mean, down here where we live, tornadoes is kind of a common thing. When a tornado comes through a little community, you know what happens? The very first thing that happens without fail, nobody has to make any phone calls. Nobody has to put anybody together and unify and be in charge. Everybody in the local community, they gather up their stuff and they go to the problem and they start helping people get out. When this tornado come through Goodman, Missouri up here, I don't live in the town, but you know what I did? The very first thing I did is I throwed my chainsaw. I throwed everything I could find that I thought might be necessary to help somebody. First aid kits, clothes, blankets, jackets, whatever. It was raining cats and dogs. The temperature was terrible. Tree limbs were down. I throwed them in my service truck. And I got everything I could gather up, got my wife, throwed her in the truck with me so she could do what she could to help people. And we went to the center of the storm and went to cutting trees down and getting people out of them houses. We didn't need nobody to tell us to do that. That's what you do. The larger the scale of the disaster, the further out the resources come from. That storm hit Joplin. It was a lot worse than the one that come through Goodman. But guess what? We had people and communities coming from the 4-state area coming in here immediately. There was nobody calling nobody, telling them they needed to go help them people. Oh, but we got to have this federal organization. We got to have this federal money. We got to have all this federal. No, that's where the corruption comes in. If it's bad enough that a complete state is devastated, look at what's going on in Texas. I hate to keep going back to that, but we got Texas is in a state of despair right now. They're being invaded by a foreign power from the southern border. And guess what? The state of Texas is saying, we're going to put a stop to this. We're going to stand up to it. And what's happening? You got different states that stand and say, we're with you, buddy. We're sending resources. Now we got National Guards coming from all over the country. Spotted, sporadic around different states. Well, they're dividing them up, red states and blue states. No, that's nonsense. They're dividing them up for people that know that there is a true emergency going on at the border and there needs to be something done about it, and the federal government is incapacitated. So that, guess what? The state is stepping up, and each state is stepping up. That's called a union. That's called the welfare of a Christian nation working together. Putting your own self-interests aside for the benefit of your neighbor. See, this is why we got back to the Word of God. It's why it's so important that we got to understand that we're supposed to be men and women of God, integrity and character, morality. See, morality is a lot more than just sleeping around. So morality is a state of mind. Morality is a established characteristic of who you are. I can go on down through these deals, administering a national welfare system, a national welfare program. No, that's the reason why we have so much corruption in the welfare program we have now. It's broken. It doesn't work. It's too far removed. You want to help the needy and the poor? I'm like Benjamin Franklin. One of his quotes, one of my favorite quotes, Benjamin Franklin, he's being pressed about the issue of dealing with the poor. He says, I am not in disagreement that we should help the poor. However, I do disagree in the way that we should help the poor. He says rain and cold and hunger are good motivators to be productive, because we need to be productive citizens of this country. See, what he was saying is when we take away the ability to achieve and to excel from the human person, we destroy that person's character and desire to be improved upon, and they have no motivation to better themselves. Do we let somebody starve to death out here? Absolutely not. But just because somebody's struggling a little bit doesn't mean I got to give away everything I've done just to keep them out of their struggle. No, sometimes that struggle is what's necessary for us to grow, what's necessary for us to learn, what's necessary for us to move forward. Do we help one another? Absolutely, we do. But when we know that we got some social welfare program that's not being monitored out here, and all we got to do is go sign up on a few pieces of paper and, and tell a few little stories, and then we get a free ride and we get a free check, and nobody's checking to see what happens after that, you know what we have? Corruption. We have corruption. I can go on down through this whole list, every one of these things without fail that I can see on this added list that's been done could be handled and should be handled within Madison's restraints by the states. It's not that those programs shouldn't exist. Well, some of them shouldn't. This one here says administering nearly 40% of the national's land area and resources. Now that should not even exist. The federal government should only own land segments large enough to house buildings that are absolutely required for them to carry out their duties. That's what the original founders said. Such as a post office, such as the necessity for government business in the area. All these parks and national parks and federal reserve lands that they own. I mean, good grief, they own, I forget what the statistics of it is, but like Arizona, I think Arizona actually only owns like 7% of the state is private owned. The rest of it's federal lands. That was never intended to be the case. If that was all put back to the people, you know, if you want to make it a park, you want to make it whatever, that's fine, but it should be state and locally governed and ran. In fact, there's statistics out there, if you want to go look them up, it says that our best kept and most profitable public parks are either state or privately owned. You know, we can have public park systems that are privately owned. That's okay. But the best kept ones in our whole country are either private or state ran. They're not federally ran. Well, what's that tell you? It tells you that the people that are in charge are too far removed. That's why we got to get back to the very basic premises of having these things established where they are supposed to be in the lowest level possible. See, this president of our United States, if he was going back to these original 6 things, he'd be in the commander-in-chief, the chief state, chief state over 300 million Americans, the commander-in-chief of the military, the executive officer of the whole executive branch, and the chief diplomat handling foreign nations, and the chief architect of legislation, and the conscience of the nation granting pardons and reprieves where justice requires them. That would give him a lot more time to take care of these things in more of a quality matter, wouldn't it? And he wouldn't be all about being in the business of the people who are supposed to be supreme. You see, I'm not about overthrowing the government and, you know, big revolt and all that nonsense that goes on. That's a fool's bet. But I am about restoring this government back to the original intention, which Madison, he's put it to about the best way that it can be put. He said the Constitution of the federal government are few and defined. Few and defined. They're absolutely clear as to what overreach is being violated in today's government. Federal government is way stepped beyond its bounds. Federal government cannot take control of the state's militia or national guards just on a whim. The state cannot segregate itself from the union just on a whim. There are reasons, there are bounds. But the perversion of our government has been it should be more clear to the general public today than it's ever been. If there was ever a chance to call a constitutional convention of the states, if there was ever a time to be able to do that, the time should be now. We need to get these states together, and it looks like they're finally realizing by the activities going on in Texas that they have the control and the power to pull things together and get these states' legislators together and take back our federal government. We need to strip all of this stuff away. We need to put these things back in order, like I've been saying for I don't know how long now on these airways. We need to repeal the 17th Amendment. We need to unfreeze the state representatives, and we need to ratify Jefferson's amendment to get control of the justices in the Supreme Court. And we put those things in place, I'm telling you, I believe within 12 years, this country will be back on course, running in the direction it ought to be done, with we the people being back in control of what's going on. 90% of this corruption will fade away on its own because you'll take the money out of all of it. You'll take all of that out of there. And what was it? I believe it was Thomas Jefferson that said, when you make our positions of honor posts of profit, then the only ones that will be attracted to it will be the thieves and the scoundrels, and they will move heaven and earth to maintain that power and wealth in those positions. And that's what we have now. You're not going to just get them people to walk away. They have been entrusted, and they have given power beyond means. They have made money beyond imaginations off the backs of the people, and those people have rooted themselves into our offices. And the only way we're going to get them out of there is to tear this constitutional thing all the way back down to the foundation that it was built upon, and build it back into the order that it was intended to be, and put our Congress back in place on a sure footing, put the protective measures that they put in there for protection of the state sovereignties, and put the control back on the legislative branches of the government according to the people's will, and get control of the legislative benches, because that's what they've become. They're legislating from the bench, which is exactly what Thomas Jefferson's fear was, and get these governmental powers separated again. That judicial power is what has brought the consolidation of our entire federal government together to make it this one big massive machine that is overriding the will of the people. The only way to get control of it is to break it back up so that it is separate powers, and that those powers be delegated, few, and defined. And that is the only way we're going to get these things back together. And I didn't give the announcement updates before we got started here. I just got tore into this thing. My apology. Check out our website at truegospelchurch.org. You'll find many links there for all kinds of information to educate yourself about this Constitution, about the Word of God, and about every aspect dealing with these matters. You got some high quality information there. And please donate. Click that button there to help us out. We're on the beginning stages of expanding now into a video format to where we can get these things going again. I cannot say enough how much I appreciate your support. There again, if you're in the Osho area and you're looking for a home church, the New Life Fellowship in the Osho, Missouri, right under the big flagpole, I invite you there. Pastor Mark and Bonnie Buzzard do a wonderful job there, preach the unadulterated Word of God. I don't know what else you can ask for in a church. So we'd love to have you there. And until we see you again on the pod, have a wonderful day.